Hello, listeners. I'm so excited to have our guest with us this week. Her name is Jennifer Moss, and her new book is Why Are We Here?, which we're going to dig into in extensive detail. Jennifer is also a speaker and she talks about employee well-being. She has had a viral HBR article about ending toxic productivity that we'll be sure to link to in our show notes. But without further ado, Jennifer, welcome to the show and thanks for sharing such wonderful ideas, refreshing ideas that we need about well-being and purpose and just putting all these puzzle pieces together. I'm thankful for your work.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'm just so excited to have a chat with you today. It's going to be great.
So the book, Why Are We Here? Why? Why write this book? What inspired you?
Why are we here? What an existential question for an existential time. I feel like it's so fitting for how I was feeling already in the last few years. But it was this moment. I had this conversation in an Uber, and this was just as the burnout epidemic had been out and launched, and it was pretty intense times. Um, and that word was becoming pretty ubiquitous. And I'm talking to people a lot about it. But there was this one woman that I met, Kara, and she kicks off the book. But she was on track to be the first female Black partner in her law firm and lost several people in her family in the pandemic. It was just really obviously catastrophic for her. And it led her to leave her firm and drive this Uber and then work on this passion project that she had been doing just as a side part of her work on top of becoming the first Black female partner in her firm. She was helping women get microloans in Costa Rica. And she said to me, when I asked her, how could you make like a move like that? And she said, life is short. It's just life is short. And what I came to understand is that as I was interviewing people about these major changes in their lives, like massive changes, 30% increase in divorce. We saw the great resignation. We saw complete shifts in loyalty. CEOs, the biggest CEO departure of any time since Challenger Gray had looked at it across the board. And everyone kept saying, like, oh, I just felt compelled. And I dug into the research and found that when we face our mortality, like we did collectively, and because it wasn't just acute, but it was persistent, our brains start to reorganize its priorities subconsciously. And we are going to lean into the things that make us feel like we're adding value to the world, that we're contributing, that there's purpose and meaning, and that we're getting that sense of that in our jobs or our lives. And we're going to push away or downgrade the things that are feeling like they don't matter. And so that's when this revolution, I think, or evolution around our identity with work really changed.
Yeah, I think we just tolerated a lot of stuff. Like you said, before your own mortality or the mortality of others around you is felt, it really does, like you said, rewires kind of like what really matters, what's really important. And yeah, we saw people change careers, change their families, change their hobbies.
Yeah.
And we've known, I think the part of me that bothers me a little bit is you've been in this work a long time too, is we've known this for a long time, that purpose-driven work, like way more effective. You have wonderful studies in your book, just about how much money we're leaving behind. Like the Gallup study, like on happiness at work costs the global economy $1.9 trillion in lost productivity. These studies have been around a while, but I'm so curious, Jennifer, like why people haven't paid attention to them. And then as they hopefully, if you're listening to this podcast, want to have a more purpose-driven culture, like how do you even start?
Well, and I love this chapter because I did get a chance to talk to Adam Grant, and I'm obviously a big fan of his work and just think he's delightful. And he's really good at taking, we spoke about before we started chatting here about this ability for him to take this research that can feel really heavy in the academia lingo and then turn it into something applicable. And he really just, said that a lot of it has to do with the fact that the measures come later. It's not this immediate measure, like I do this impacts, XYZ in the business outcomes. But when you do measure it and you take the time to invest, measure it, long game strategy shows that it has huge impact. Raj Sisodia wrote conscious capitalism and firms of endearment and show just the huge impact when we have purpose-driven, well organizations. I mean, it's like over 1,500% gap difference in how they perform. That's how much they outperform those on the S&P 500 by just being purpose driven. So there's lots of measures, and it's always really, it's just always really boils down to, is this a bottom line issue? And if you can't measure it really quickly, you don't invest in it, which is so unfortunate because it really does work. And we focus so much on, this big value of purpose. Oh, like, yeah, I know purpose is in our values, it's in our mission statement. There's this really cool, glossy, laminated, poster that talks about purpose is one of our values. And no one really knows what that means, how to define it, what that means to organizational vision and mission. And so, what I've been telling leaders is, people don't actually really care about the mission statement as much as maybe the senior leaders do, because there's a huge purpose gap. Senior and executive leaders feel so much more mission driven than the average worker. The delta is quite significant. And so, what we need to do is get employees to see what is it that they do in their day-to-day role. Is it communicating with people? Oh, well, part of my purpose is being a good friend or caring about my community. Oh, well, now that day-to-day task of emailing and communicating with people now has value. I mean, and this is what we need people to understand, is like, what motivates you and what do you care about? And then how do we associate that with the tasks that we do? And the more we can get into that like day-to-day thinking for people, the more likely we are to reduce bore out, burnout from boredom, burnout, chronic stress, and then those mundane and tedious tasks that all of us have to deal with at work suddenly feel less mundane and tedious, which is, really good for motivation and productivity.
Yeah, no way you can do your best work when you're bored or threatened or not feeling connected to a deeper purpose, right? You're just kind of going through
Yes.
the motions, doing the bare minimum. We've all been there, even our most productive people. I learned a new term in your book, Jennifer, phobo, in the
Yes.
compassionate chapter. It's like,
Yes.
what is phobo and why is it so important, this whole existential idea of why we're here?
I've landed on that term. That was a Gallup term, so I can't take ownership of it. But I love all these terms, like FOMO, fear of missing out. JOMO is one of my favorites from the pandemic. Joy of missing out is the best. But phobo is fear of becoming obsolete. And when I dug into that, I thought that was really interesting because Gallup showed there's this increase in fear of obsolescence because of AI. Automation was already impacting mature workers, but now we're seeing younger workers really impacted. That number of fearing of becoming obsolete has doubled in the last, only 5 years, really, for folks that are in our younger generation. And then we've seen Microsoft Trends report, the joint report that they did with LinkedIn. They found 1 in 2 employees globally are feeling AI anxiety. And so that is really impactful. It can be, obsolescence in any organization, and those feelings across an organization is something that can feel like a toxic contagion. And people start to check out. They think, I don't see myself in the future of this organization. I don't see how I'm going to even be here using AI because I don't even know what the strategy is. We've just mass adopted AI. I still wonder if it's like iRobot and they're going to come and, it's a mass extinction event because that's what I hear on one hand. Or is it going to be my partner? There's just so much uncertainty and fear and not a lot of really good strategic communication. And so in that chapter, I really focus on, compassion, because empathy is a lot of active listening, and that's really important. And compassion is to action what we heard. It's like that next step. Like, so we need to spend a lot of time in empathy exercises in learning what people want. That's the gray area data. And then to execute on that is to show people, oh, I listened and I did something about it. And so that's what we need to do is just listen to what people are feeling about their fears, not make assumptions like, I don't like the term reverse mentoring. I feel like it says that certain demographics are smarter at something than another. Like, oh, well, we'll reverse
It's
mentor. Like,
reverse. It's opposite of what it should be. Yeah.
right. How about peer mentorship? And so anyone can fit into that group. I mean, you can be 80 and be a genius in AI. I mean, I think Dr. Hinton, who is the, the grandfather of AI, like the person who actually built it, he's in his like 70s and he is probably the smartest person on AI ever. And so this idea that mature workers need to learn from younger workers about technology, and it also makes it so that our younger cohort, if they aren't digitally nascent or they don't know everything about AI, suddenly like
What?
what? It
You
like
don't fit the stereotype. Yeah.
right. And so they might not put up their hand to say I need more training because that's just not something I can't unbrand myself as knowing everything about AI. And so there's all these things that I think we need to do a better job of is understand how people are feeling, have better communication strategies, and just like, wipe what we've been doing so far, kind of light a match to that playbook because it's not working and do a better job of integrating something that is still I think we're still
Yeah.
very unsure of.
Yeah. Well, and you say a lot of data. I appreciate the generational differences and threading through this idea of purpose with different generations because we know Gen Z, you know, definitely during their formative years experienced the pandemic. So that whole brain rewiring thing is not surprising that a lot of them it's purpose over paycheck, which I think just, for older generations, myself included, it's like, what? I thought that was the whole goal. Like
Yes.
I remember my personal journey being young in college and being a business major. And my mom's like, oh, why you're doing this business thing? You seem really interested in this women's studies program you've been minoring in. And I'm like, Mom, I'm here to make money. I don't know what you're talking about. No one's going to make money doing women's studies work, which, ha ha ha, she was totally right. But
Right.
there's
Yes.
this narrative of like, you can't like make money and live your purpose. And Gen Z's
Right.
like,
Uh,
I don't think
I
so.
can. Yes, I can.
So I've been waiting for this like moment where the eclipse in the workplace finally changes for younger generations, but we
Yes.
just holding on to the old way. What do you think it will like? Where will be the breaking point, or is there where Gen Z and I think just it's not just them, it's us, like it's all of us
Yes.
collectively that want this
Yes.
purpose, but especially them coming into the workforce not being maybe as jaded as some of us have gotten. Like, what is it going to take for their voices to be heard?
I think, we saw that happen, that shift. You would have seen that in the pandemic, where all of a sudden we're spending a whole bunch of money on well-being. We're like robustly investing in DEI. We're doing all these great things. There's all this talk about flexibility and well-being initiatives. It's just, every leader was responding, an employer was responding because it was a bottom line issue. And when it is a bottom line issue, when there is a talent shortage, so many things are invested in. And when there's less mobility, the trend tends to be that we pull back, really pull back, obviously, in some areas. And what I think is unfortunate is that we have this idea that like retention is the only measure, whereas I would say disengagement and having people feeling stuck and actively disengaged inside of your organizations and super unhappy and burned out and less productive is way worse than an attrition, issue or turnover. I mean, turnover is expensive. And so you can solve both of these things by continuing to invest in things that employees really cared about and they were you were trust building in these times where you were investing in that. And so, across generations, I think the only time it's really going to be that we're listening in an active way for a lot of employers is when we really see the measurable outcomes. And that sounds very cynical, but I guess I've been in it for a long time and I've seen, unfortunately, how things shift. And there are organizations doing a great job of being progressive and they just naturally get it. But, that unfortunately, that's not the standard, that's not the majority. But there's also just a lack of understanding of really what that looks like to have a healthy culture and a well culture. And if you're not in the work, if you're not actually in the front lines with people, if you're not walking the floor with people, or if you're not talking to employees, you don't know what the culture gap is. Like there was this one study that I just found the other day where it was 68% of executive leadership and C-level believe that well-being has increased and in the last 2 years. And you had almost the same amount of people, employees saying that well-being has worsened. And so,
Because again, this frontline versus top executives, like everything's great because I'm a part of it. I'm choosing to invest in this, and the frontline's like, I'm not feeling any of this, right? It's not landing.
it's not landing. It's not even like it's neutral. Like I feel more unhappy. And Gallup's, the great detachment, the definition of that is really just people stuck. Highest level of active disengagement, in over
And
a
they've said this for
decade,
decades. We're going backwards, not forwards.
really going back. This isn't just like in since the pandemic. This is some of the worst data we've seen in a really long time. So I think these types of outcomes are saying, okay, we let's not just look at attrition or mobility, or let's not just look at it like it's if there's a lot of people resigning, that's a reason for us to put in a whole bunch of money into preventing burnout and increasing well-being and making sure we have a diverse talent force and retaining women. Like just we need to be looking at this as just this is how we do business. And a big part of it for me is, and I say this in one of the chapters, I said we need to stop looking at this as a benevolent strategy. It's not just like I'm being really nice, I'm human centered. I'm part of this elite group of organizations that just are really about, taking care of my employees, like the Patagonias and the other ones that are just really good at that. That's what they're excellent at. But it's about like this is a business strategy. You want to be a capitalist, you want to be globally competitive, you want to have better shareholder returns. Well, you just have diverse talent. You want to be like to be able to be future ready, you have compassion, you have empathy, you invest in people's health and well-being. This is just part of being a capitalist. And I think that's where we need to shift the language. And until that happens, we're just going to have generational bias and discord. We're going to have, unhappy people and this sense of detaching from work.
Yeah. Like severance, like we're one person. It's just, it doesn't work that way.
So,
And you're right. Yeah. Capitalism. I think people think about those things as socialism, like social services, well-being, things
yes.
like that. And you can be in a capitalist society and make money and do really well and also be purpose-driven and employee well-being centric. Like they don't have to be different things. And too often we don't focus on the paradox of
Yes.
this is a both and. Interesting. Last question for you, Jennifer, is I really appreciated the attention you put on gender, as well as, there was a lot on, different dimensions of diversity, neurodiversity, disability, which affects so many people in the world, generations, and gender. And I don't think people realize like we still haven't like really engaged women in a way in the workforce, especially because we lost so many women with COVID and we're still at a deficit. And the data is not telling us we're getting better. If anything, what we did is kind of catapulted women into these leadership roles because we're at a whopping, record rate as we're recording this 12-ish% of Fortune 500 CEOs are led by women and very few women of color. So what it's led to is McKinsey's really good at studying that broken rung, that pipeline problem. And I'm seeing this, and it's so interesting as I'm doing new research for a new book I'm writing about people in power and how they can be better allies, is we took all the women, bumped them up, and then there's like this void. And
Mhm.
so what we're doing is these junior women that show potential is just catapult them into the middle realm where they're not being coached, they're not being given feedback, they're not ready for like the work life hectic schedule stuff all humans have experienced, but especially women because we're primary caregivers usually too. So we have like this void in the middle of organizations. It's like, where are the women? And I'm just wondering what you think organizations can do to be proactive about that.
I think first recognize that it really is, a problem still. And it's this, I think there's still this mindset like, oh, well, we kind of like see women everywhere in these roles and wow, we've made so many strides and we should feel really proud of that. And I just feel like it's the time's up for incremental gains. We saw, I mean, we're seeing, yeah, like it's really celebrated that we are at 12%. We should be at 50%. Like, I mean, it
Why is
just
that okay? Like, why are we celebrating that? Like,
it's
it's just,
just not that's not celebratory for me. And in, our global CEOs for women, for the first time in a decade, we've gone down. We went from 12% to 11% globally. So this is like across the board, we're seeing this decrease. So we're not seeing gains there. And it just, to me, it feels frustrating that we are still in this conversation and that, and that we're still seeing issues crop up. I was on a CNBC uh, interview and we were doing a panel. We were talking about DEI, and one of the organizations ended up saying, like, oh, I don't know if we can support the Women in Leadership event this year, the conferences, because of the DEI stuff. And I just thought, like, if we're going to fire 50, all the women in organizations, how is that even going to be economically viable
yeah.
for our countries, for the world? I mean, so we're really just, frustratingly bad at understanding how critical it is to have diverse people in our organizations. And for women, there's so much that we can be doing. Understanding what policies,
Mhm.
are going to impact them negatively, understanding about life stage benefits, and really understanding that there is certain needs that women are going to have at certain times of their lives, how we can create benefits that attach to the needs that they have. RTO mandates of 5 days a week are actually really detrimental to progress for women. We're also seeing women burn out exponentially more than their male counterparts. And we've seen burnout actually increase for women in the last year and decrease for their male counterparts. So there's something that's a big gap there. There's a lot of things that we can be doing around pay audits and just be making sure that people feel like there's a reason that I'm here. When you look at the 6 root causes of burnout, lack of fairness is a big part of why people burn out. And until we solve really for pay equity, then we're just going to always have burnout for women.
Yeah.
So, like it's that
No. Yes.
solvable.
Well, I think that the interesting thing on pay equity is what companies leap to, oh, great, now we're going to spend all this money. But to your point, there's a lot of leaky bucket things you're spending money on by not solving that problem. And if you ask men, they're like, well, I don't want to earn more money than my female That doesn't feel fair to me. It doesn't feel good for anyone. Fairness is a very primal human sentiment. I have found recently in my psychological safety analysis, fairness apparently is a huge trigger for me. Shocker, because I do this work. It's like, I
Yeah.
know now if something's not fair, I am irate, like very upset. And most people experience something that's unjust in them. And I think that that's a really great point, Jennifer, that you can solve for this with a pay audit, with looking how we treat different people. Are we being fair at different stages of the employment life cycle? And just being willing to be a little vulnerable and maybe some things that we're not getting right so that we can be better. If I think of anything that's really preventing DEI or whatever we call it in the future, is this unwillingness to be vulnerable in this moment of we don't have this figured out. Even Patagonia doesn't have it figured out. And they would tell you
Everyone
that
does.
because they're Patagonian, they live the
Yep.
purpose. So it's like,
Yep.
why can't companies just be like, maybe there's some things we have to work on? And that's okay. That makes you a great leader. And I just wish we had more companies that would be vulnerable, that maybe they're not as purpose driven as they could be.
I love that you're saying this. This is, I think, the most critical piece. We have jumped what I think jumped a timeline. Like we are in the multiverse of work. This is not the future of work. We've literally entered a new timeline. And so we have to kind of think as maybe 2020 is the start of something totally brand new. And even layering up to that, trying to solve a problem that is so institutionally baked, that's just millennia in the making, to think that we're supposed to have this all figured out with the solution in just such a short amount of time. And then you throw in this cataclysmic event that changes everything and disrupts work entirely. And then now what, that experiment is over? Like we've just
We're going to go
failed,
back.
experiment's done. I mean, how can you be that? That just feels so ego driven to me. Like I should be able to have solved it and I didn't. Okay, well, then that thing doesn't matter. We have to look like if you're a really good leader, if you're a strong leader, you have humility, you are agile. I mean, you are someone that says, oh, like this was an experiment. So many tech companies talk about failing forward and how failure is a big part of, good productization. Why aren't you taking that same mindset to everything else in your organization? That agility mindset should be part of solving for something that is like compared to advancements in technology, when we're talking about systemic discrimination, I mean, we're talking about and gender bias, we're talking about things that are just so old that it's going to take a lot more than even probably 50 years to come up with good solutions. So I think that short-sightedness and that inability to take this really important data over here that you live your organization by, that's the credo of your organization, and not applying it to these other very important pieces of how you lead, feels like that's selective hearing, and that's not going to
Very
be real good.
consistent. Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about things, especially as people are wrestling with that Bobo, right? Like, this is a great opportunity to reinvent work and free our capacity with AI so that we can do more of these purpose-driven, people-centric ideas that we always think we don't have enough time for. Hmm.
Mm.
Jennifer, oh, this is such important work that you're doing. Tell our listeners how they can follow you and stay engaged with your work.
Thanks, Julie. And I want to say your work is really important right now, too. So I celebrate you right now. If people want to find me, they can go to jennifer-moss.com. And really, like everything's just sort of there in the mishmash on the website.
Yes, great links to talks, to articles, all sorts of great resources. Jennifer, thanks so much for being with us today. So thankful for you.
Oh, thankful for you too, Julie. Thank you.